So for our final session of the day, we're going to talk in depth about NIST Special Pub 853, Revision 4. Security and privacy controls for federal information systems and organizations. So, good housekeeping, patching, things like that, necessary, definitely, absolutely, but not sufficient. You cannot count, configure, or patch your way out of the security problems that we face today. And so we like to say that being satisfied with stopping 85% of cyber attacks is like being happy you plugged up 85% of the holes in the bottom of your boat. So I mentioned I'm a little down on the checklist approach, I admit it. It has its place, again, if it's scoped and maybe you do a checklist for certain aspects, but overall, checklist-based set of controls focus on counting, configuring, and patching. We really can't configure, count, and patch our way to security. We have to manage the risk, and that does require the careful thought. And if you're just doing a checklist, then you're not really giving it that thought. And so, you know, checklists have their place, but from the overall risk management perspective, we don't consider that to be sufficient. So, so we have the risk management framework instead. So let's revisit. We've already seen this, our tiers. The controls that we have defined in 853, some of them live at each one of these tiers. So we have certainly some controls regarding policies, and that probably mostly live up here at Tier 1. We have some mission business process controls that live here in Tier 2, and not the least of which is our whole program management family. And I think I get to that later, hopefully. But anyway, and then of course we have the bulk of our controls living here at the system level. So I just put this up again. We just went over the whole risk management framework, if you'll recall, from a half an hour ago, and but we're here. The 853 is basically the whole select step between FIPS 200 and 853. So I think we saw this slide already. It's a catalog. Again, we don't order every, and I wanted to say before that the moderate baseline has 269 controls. So I think there's something on the order of 1,000 and 1,100 controls and enhancements in the whole catalog, and the moderate baseline has 269 controls and enhancements in it. So that's a good example of the ratio of total controls to controls in the moderate baseline. We already talked about the select step. We do define those three baselines, the low, moderate, and high baselines, and we saw this before, published in 2005, and the latest version published April of 2013. We already saw this slide also, safeguards, that's what security controls are, and again, 53 is a big giant catalog of these controls. We talked already about the common controls, the system-specific controls, and the hybrid controls being a combination of system-specific and common. Let's talk about a concept a little bit that we actually just introduced in Rev 4 about security capabilities. So the protection that you need are seldom derived from a single control. You know, if you're going to do account management, it's just not AC2. You have to rope in a lot of other controls with it. Or like the example that we give here, the capability for secure remote authentication. You need all of these controls. Identity and authentication controls, and various controls and enhancements. SC8 is secure transmitting of data, and another SC8 enhancement. So there's not a single control that gives you that capability, and so we just wanted to bring that up, that you might have to, you define a capability you need, and you might have to pull out numerous controls from the catalog to help you get that capability.
Kelley, do you have a mapping of those common type, issues like, for instance, the secure remote authentication with that mapping, because that would be really helpful, because I'm up at the enterprise level, and we're just putting together a common control type of map that all these different projects can leverage off of. But it's very difficult for me to tell the IT people, oh, by the way, you have to adhere to this, and wait, you have to get this one as well, and I forgot this one. And it would be so easy to have something where, you know, if it's server configuration or whatever, you know, and you have those. Suggestion, if you don't have it already.
The answer is no, we don't have it now, but we would love to have it, and we're hoping with Rev 5 that we can add to the security capability aspect in 53, so hopefully we'll see that in the next version. But it is a great idea, and I think it would be helpful. And it would also tie into DHS's efforts with the continuous diagnostics and mitigation, because they work along the lines of capabilities versus individual controls. So, yes, okay. So that's just a little bit about that, something to think about for now. So here is the actually 18 families, and so all of these except for program management are defined in FIPS 200. And we added the program management family because it's made up of federal mandates that already existed, and so we just put them in there to sort of rope everything together and help people know that those controls were there and needed to be done for their overall program management. But the program management controls, they do not live at the system level. So you're not going to be implementing program management controls on your system. So no one's system security plan should be addressing program management controls. So we should see those addressed in the organizational information security program plan, or something that's up at tier 2 probably, or possibly tier 1. But we do have that family in there. It's in appendix, it might be appendix G, I believe it is appendix G. And so those controls are there, and organizations should be looking at them. They're just not at the system level. So we'll move on if that's okay. So this is what the control structure looks like. So every control looks something like this, where we have the number, so that's the family, the audit and accountability family, AU, and there's the name of the control, and there's the control statement. And we can see here we have one of those parameters. We're going to go over the parameters later, so I won't beat it up here. And then we have supplemental guidance, and with the supplemental guidance comes related controls. And I have slides on that later, but keep that in mind. Related controls are an important concept. And then if they exist, then there may be control enhancements. So you're never going to implement an enhancement without the base control. So enhancements are just that. They enhance or make more robust, or provide more assurance to the base control. So there may be one or more enhancements with every control, or none in some cases, and the enhancements go along the same lines. They're all named like this. They start with the name of the base control, and then we've named, if anyone ever looked at any of the previous versions of 53, we did not name the control enhancements, but now they have names, so they're easier to refer to for some people. And then what the control enhancement is, and then control enhancements may also have their own supplemental guidance. And if they have a related control that was not already related, then you may see an individual related control here. This particular control has no references, but you may see references to other special pubs or to external documents of some kind here. And then we have our priority and baseline allocations. The priorities, I think I have a slide on priorities, I don't know. Priorities just have a slide. I reminded myself in my notes in case I forgot. So I won't talk about that now. But then we can see what is selected in each baseline. So we have the whole baselines defined in Appendix D, but for each control that you go to, you can see that AU4 applies to all the baselines, but AU4 Enhancement 1 also applies to, or is selected in the baseline for high impact. But that's not actually true. So I just put that in there because I was trying to find an example that could fit on one slide. So The truth is, enhancement 1 is not selected for AU4 in the high baseline, but I just put that as an example, so don't use this slide as part of your system development. But in any case, this is how it looks, and this is how you can tell what the controls and enhancements are allocated to what baseline. So let's talk about the related controls. They're listed in the supplemental guidance like we just saw. They directly impact or support the implementation of a control or enhancement, and or they may address a closely related security capability. So we talked about those capabilities. You might find that for a given control, some of those related controls help with an overall capability that you might be trying to employ. They're not repeated in the supplemental guidance for control enhancements, so the assumption is that the control enhancements are also related to those related controls, unless there's extra ones in the control enhancements. And they should be leveraged during your implement and assess steps to avoid rework. So this is one way that we try to save your resources, by letting you know these controls are related. It might be when you're doing implementations that, since they're related, when you do something, you might end up implementing more than one thing at a time, or the relatedness might cause you to have to do things in a certain order. Like you might have to implement one control before you can implement another control. So the idea is to just take a look at those related controls before you dive in and start implementing, and make sure that you're not going to have any relatedness issues and have to double back and do rework because you didn't pay attention to that in the first place. And then the other time to use it is in the assess step. Same thing there. When you assess something, it might actually, whatever tests or whatever methods you use, you might find that actually applied also to some other related control, and so you don't need to do it over because you kind of already tested it or in the related control. So just look out for that.
Kelley?
Yes?
I noticed between Rev 3 and Rev 4, you took out the administrative and technical and managerial.
We did.
What was the reason for that?
Well, so the families, each family we had designated as a specific, either a management, operational, or technical control. So for instance, the AC family was designated as a technical control, or a technical family. And we just didn't think that was helpful because there was too much crossover. Within the AC family, even though we had said it was a technical family, tons of operational and management stuff in there. And so to say that it was, to label it, as a technical family was really not correct, for one thing. And also, I personally didn't think it was overly helpful. Now, when we get into the control, so in 53 Rev 4 in the front, and that brings up another point. Please read the first 3 chapters of like I mentioned earlier about having not read volume 1 of 860 when I first started doing this myself. I'm sure no one in this room has done it, but I know from talking to people that there are many people who just open right up to Appendix F and start going. So you miss a lot of good information on how the whole process works. More so in 53 than in 860, way more so, if you don't read the first 3 chapters. And the 3rd chapter in particular is vital, I would say, before you should start implementing. But in any case, in chapter 3, we discuss having removed those designations, and we tell you that they can still be applied to a specific, so what's this? The organization allocates audit record storage capacity in accordance with organization defined audit. So this is basically how many gigabytes of memory are we gonna allocate, or of hard drive space are we gonna allocate to our audit log storage. So that's kind of, even that's hard to pinpoint. It's kind of operational and it's kind of technical because you have to allocate that space. So it's really, in many cases, it's just too hard to do any type of a designation like that. But what we say in the guidance in chapter 3 is if it's helpful to you to try to designate it yourself at the control level, then feel free. But we just removed those designations because we just felt that the labeling of things like that wasn't really helping anyone. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was hired on to do a system security plan right off the bat, and I jumped into Appendix F, and I saw the labels and like, oh great, it helps me focus my interviews with different people who I didn't know who they were. And so it helped me, but then all of a sudden they disappeared. It was like, oh.
Well, sorry if they helped you, but but anyway, we just didn't find it was helpful, and so we took them out. And but like I said, we left you the opportunity if you want to do the designations on your own. The priority codes, they help you make implementation sequencing decisions to deploy controls in some sort of a structured manner. So in no way do we mean that a priority 1 control is more important than a priority 2 or priority 3 control. And that's also helping, so some of the controls that are priority 1s are foundational controls, so similar to the related ones, you might need them to be implemented before you can implement other controls on top of it. And again, we do not imply importance there. So if in the moderate baseline, there's whatever 100 priority 1 controls and 100 priority 2 controls and 69 priority 3 controls or whatever, it's just meant to help you implement in a structured way in case you're having resource problems or just need a little help in that area. Okay, the baselines. Defined in Appendix D, Table D2. And the way we determine baselines, we use the system categorizations, we think about organizational risk assessment and risk tolerance, and we use our system level risk assessments. And again, we've seen this slide already. Baselines can and should be tailored. We're going to talk more about all of these things, parameters, scoping, and supplementing, so we don't need to talk more now. But again, if you're not tailoring your baseline, then you're just doing a checklist. And you're probably going to be wasting resources. So clarification of the term baseline. So we use the term intentionally. It means it's a starting point, and that's why we have the tailoring process, because we know that those 269 controls in the moderate baseline, it's going to be a very rare system indeed that it's appropriate to implement every single one of those controls, and also that there's no other controls that they can pull from the rest of the catalog to supplement. It's likely that some controls are not going to be needed, or for whatever reason, and then it's also likely that you're going to need to pull in some supplemental controls to counter some other types of threats or specific issues with the system. So the baselines are a starting point, and then you apply the tailoring guidance, and again, specialization of the security plan is the goal there. So here's a little depiction of that. We have the master security control catalog with the complete set of controls, and then we have our low impact, moderate impact, and high impact baselines. And as you can see, the low impact is a subset consisting of basic controls. The moderate builds on, so everything in the moderate baseline is already in the low baseline, everything in the high baseline is already in the moderate and low baseline. So there's a building of controls there. So that's all that diagram depicts. Not too tough. Here is an excerpt of how the baseline looks, the table in Table D2. Obviously there's a lot more, but this is what it looks like. So you can see a lot of the information is repeated, the name of the control, whether or not, so the account management control is selected in all 3 baselines, but then we've got a bunch of enhancements here as well. So we can see that if you have a moderate impact system, you have AC2 selected, as well as control enhancements 1, 2, 3, and 4 from AC2 for your moderate baseline, and so on. And then you can also see that we have some controls, like this one, that's not selected in any baseline. So that's one of those ones that's available for you to implement if you have some threats against you or some special circumstances that you need to have the previous logon access notification. Let's see. There's not one in here. Oh, here it is. Here's one. That's fine. Sometimes controls are withdrawn. And so we don't reuse the number, because that would be more confusing than it already is. So we note it in the table as having been withdrawn. And then in the actual Appendix F, then it'll usually say it's withdrawn and incorporated into some other control or what happened to it. We didn't just get rid of it in most cases. So that's how Appendix D looks, and that's how it works. So why are some controls not on the baseline? I think we already went over this, but we already said that every system doesn't need to implement every control, and so we have those comprehensive set of controls available for you if you need to supplement to strengthen the level of protection or assurance in accordance with those things. Risk tolerance, system risk, and overlay requirements for special communities, and we'll talk about overlays later. So also in Appendix D, we added some additional tables. So now in Appendix D, there's, after Table D2, we have tables D3, I think through D19. And they are one for each family. So this gets a little more specific. We can see here that the enhancements are now listed in name. So you can see them in more of a table format instead of thumbing through Appendix F. And then you can see if it's withdrawn, there's an X. If it's an assurance-related control, we're going to talk about assurance in a few minutes. But if it's assurance-related control, it's marked in that column. And here you can see that system security plan concept of operations was incorporated into. Oh my God, I can't see that. Thank you. So there you go. So that tells you what happened to it. And by incorporated, that doesn't mean, and we have comments from people when we do our public comment process, and they'll come in and say, you said it was incorporated into PL7, but I don't see those exact words in there. So don't be alarmed. Sometimes it's not the exact words, but you know, we felt it was covered in there, and so that's why we withdrew it. But in any case, so you'll see those sorts of things, and then again, you can see which baseline everything is selected in. So in Appendix D, there's a table now for each one of the families. So assumptions that we made in 853 Revision 4. We made assumptions when we determined the baselines. And if we recall from our earlier discussion way early this morning about NIST Special Pub 839, assumptions are a key element in the risk framing step that we need to identify. So, and assumptions may be related to the list you see there, your operational environments, your mission objectives, functionality of the system, threats, and your information types processed, stored, or transmitted. And again, this is all information that if you read the first 3 chapters, you would already know this. So the assumptions that we actually applied to the baselines are these that you see here. We assume that the systems are in fixed locations, they're not mobile, that the information is relatively persistent. It's not changing every day. I mean, you know, databases change, whatever, but for the most part, it's persistent. Information systems are multi-user, and that they exist in a networked environment, and that they're general purpose in nature. So, of course, in the government, we have, especially in DoD, we have some really specialized systems. So you couldn't base your baselines on specialized systems. So we assume general purpose systems, and we also assume that organizations have the resources and infrastructure to implement the controls and the baselines. So that might have not been our best assumption. But anyway, these assumptions that we made may not apply to maybe even a lot of systems out there, and so that's one of the reasons why you need to look at tailoring your baseline and doing specialized security plans. So some assumptions we specifically did not apply to the baselines are that about insider threats, we didn't assume anything about that there was any classified information. We did not assume that there was advanced persistent threats present and living on your systems. And we did not assume that any specialized protection was needed. such as like with HIPAA or those sorts of things, the, what's the financial one? Sarbanes-Oxley. And so we didn't make those assumptions, and the different policy domains is kind of a DoD thing, but it's different classification levels. So we didn't assume any. So these were assumptions we did not apply in our baselines. But if there are assumptions you need to make, then that's when you need to go in again and tailor that baseline. Okay, common controls. So we talked about this a bit already. Security controls that are available for inheritance from other organizational entities. Other than the system owner. Generally, we hope they get identified by the organization up at Tier 1 or Tier 2, and then that information is made available to the system owners. And then I talked earlier about how common control providers may be at the system level, such as with firewalls, maybe log management, things along those lines, or at the mission business process level, such as with HR and physical security. Was everyone here for that discussion? So I won't repeat that now. I notice there is no physical security here. Do some of your California installations have physical security at all? Well, actually there was. If you went the other way, you did have to go through. So that it looked like was, they looked like they were hired hands, or contractors, I should say.
This area is open to the public.
This area, right.
This area is open to the public, but the rest of the facility.
Right, I forgot about that when I first walked in because I went right to the auditorium, so they did actually have the security in place there. So that is something that, so if your system lives in this building, then you would reference whoever those people are as providing the physical security for your system, and you wouldn't be providing that yourself at the system level. More on common controls. We talked already about how they're hybrid when one part of the control is common and another part is system specific. They are assessed and authorized by senior level officials with at least the same level of authority as those responsible for systems. So just because a common control isn't at the system level, somebody still needs to assess it and authorize it before it's made available for inheritance. And then they are supplemented at the system level when things aren't sufficient. So I mentioned earlier, if you have a high impact system and the common control is only rated at the moderate level, then you might need to do some supplementation there, or possibly not even inherit it at all and just implement the whole thing at the system level. And of course the information about the common controls, not only that they're available, but how are they implemented, what are they low, moderate, or high, is there any POAMs against them, you know, what assessment information. System owners need to have that information before they can make their own risk-based decisions about whether or not to inherit a control. So that information has to be made available. And I want to say that common controls are vital for resource management and effective use of resources. So you can amortize costs across multiple systems, you have implementation standardization, there's a lot of pluses with common controls, so I hope that organizations can work, that the state, you know, can work to implement common controls to the greatest extent possible. Okay, let's talk about tailoring. We've heard a lot about it. So it's not the number of security controls that matters, it's having the right controls to do the job. Again, that's what managing risk is about. So there's no, oops. Oh, okay, sorry. There you go. So there's no shortcuts. So this is a kind of funny thing, but no shortcuts with tailoring. So, tailoring guidance, again, you start by identifying your common controls, then you apply scoping considerations, and then you select compensating controls if needed to compensate for what you scoped out. Then you assign your specific values with the parameters. We have a slide on most of these things coming up. Then you supplement your baseline with any additional controls that you may need. And then you provide any additional specification information, again, if needed. Scoping considerations. They help you select and implement only those controls that you really need to appropriately protect your information system commensurate with risk, like FSMA tells us to do.
Kelly, you may want to go one slide up.
Okay, did I miss that slide?
No, you had.
I just didn't, I must have thought, okay, sorry about that. Right, okay. So, you apply them as needed to assist with risk-based decisions when you're selecting your controls. And the scoping considerations that we do have noted in section 3.2 of 53 Rev 4, they're not intended to limit organizations in making their risk-based decisions. So just if something's not covered by a scoping consideration, but you still need to make a risk-based decision and not implement that control, then you are certainly free to do that as long as you have documented it appropriately in your security plan so that everybody knows why you didn't implement that and what you've done to perhaps compensate or supplement. So, but we have the scoping considerations available to you. Control allocation and placement considerations. These are, you might scope out of something. So again, if you have a system with multiple different types of components, you might allocate all of the log management only on this one server because maybe all the event logs are going to get dumped onto that server. So so you look at how you can allocate controls. And only have the controls applied where they're needed. So you might say, so if an assessor's coming in and they're looking at all your servers, well, where are your logs stored? What's going on here, So some of those AU controls might be all covered by a log management server, just as an example. And so that's control allocation and placement consideration. So you document that that's what you're doing, and that's why you don't have that control implemented on every single component in the system. Operational environmental related considerations. So you might, if you have some systems that are in fact mobile, then there's some controls that just aren't going to work for that from a technical perspective, perhaps, or that just aren't, that would be stupid to do, because it just wouldn't make sense. Single user systems, data connectivity and bandwidth, so these are all defined in more detail, of course, in 53. Let's see what we have. Limited functionality systems, information and system non-persistence, and public access systems. So if you have a system sitting out there for the public to access, then there's a lot of, you're not going to do authorization and identification type controls. So those are those types of considerations. Security objective related considerations I mentioned earlier when we talked about categorization. I talked about remembering even if you find that a system is high impact, maybe that's because of the confidentiality, but maybe it's low impact for availability. And so again, you can scope out of doing the high impact controls for contingency planning. This is the easiest example, which is why I use it. Contingency planning is a family of controls that really supports just availability. And so if your system is low for availability, just because it's high for confidentiality, that means not having it available is not such a big deal as long as the information stays, only known to the people who need to know. So instead of implementing the high impact controls for contingency planning, which are pretty strenuous for if the system is really high for availability, you don't need to do that. And so you only go ahead and implement the low availability impact controls for that particular control or family that, sorry. And so that's a security objective related consideration. And then we have technology-related considerations. And so you might have legacy systems or various types of platforms or components within your system that whatever the control is asking you to do, it just can't be done. It's not possible. For a legacy system, who knows, maybe you'd have to go in and spend $200,000 to retrofit the whole system or get it, get software altered or things along those lines. And so you can make that security commensurate with risk decision and decide that because of technological reasons, you're not going to do that. And with the technology-related considerations, that's where we most often see the need to compensate and apply a compensating control. So if you have that legacy system and it just cannot do a certain control because of whatever the technological limitations are, that might not relieve the need for that control to be in place. And so, so you compensate by perhaps an operational process of some kind or something like that. And then you might have mission requirements related considerations, where something cannot be done because it would mess up, your mission would be negatively affected. And so you document that and accept it as a risk. And so once we've looked at our scoping, at those scoping considerations, then I mentioned the compensating controls. Also you're obviously going to select them from the control set in Appendix F, and you implement them when baseline controls can't be implemented, but you still need to do it. It's the control is still needed to protect the system. And you want that compensating control to provide similar protection that to the greatest extent possible that the other control did. And of course you document that with your supporting rationale. Let's see here. Okay, so next is with tailoring is our parameters. So we have an example on the next slide, but we have two different types of parameter values available: assignment statements and selection statements. So these are things that are sort of left blank. They're part of the control and they're in brackets, but the organization gets to select what to fill in that blank with. And those do provide you the flexibility to implement controls commensurate with risk and how it's going to be best for your mission support. Sometimes they may be assigned. For instance, we have in the contingency planning, again, we don't define for you that it has to be within any given, testing, contingency plan testing. We don't say it has to be annually, but for federal organizations, OMB tells us our contingency plan testing has to be annually. So in that case, it's been defined for us, so we have to do it at least annually. Maybe some organizations, choose to do it more frequently. You can always do it more than what the requirements are, but the point is you be cognizant of the fact that you might have someone else telling you what your assignment statement needs to be in some cases. And of course, these can be assigned by any tier as appropriate. So you might start out, there might be some of these parameters that are assigned by the state at the top level, and then as you come down the various organizational levels, then maybe more things get filled in, and then whatever's left at the system level that hasn't already been dictated to you at the upper levels, then you fill in those blanks at the system level. So here's our example, and I picked this one because you can see it's pretty crazy. There's a lot of assigning and selecting going on here. So we start out with security assessments and specialized assessments. And the organization includes, as part of the security control assessments, organization define how often. So first you assign how often you're going to do these specialized assessments. And then you select whether or not they're going to be announced or unannounced, the specialized assessments. And then you go on to select what it's going to be. And so then we give you some ideas to select from, and then also, as part of this, other form. So this is one of the crazier ones, by the way. So it seems a little confusing to parse, but the point is the organization gets to make these determinations for themselves. Any questions about this? Okay. Are you sure? So once we've gone through all of that, now we can start deciding if we need to supplement. And so, like we mentioned earlier about the assumptions, if those assumptions didn't apply to you, then you're probably going to need to determine some supplemental controls. And you probably do anyway, but certainly if your system is inside the area of some of the assumptions we didn't make, then you'll need to probably apply some supplementation. Let's see. And not only that, but you may have specific threats and vulnerabilities specific to your system or your organization that you need to use some supplemental controls for. And Some inputs may include your risk assessments or your policies, and then they're not the same as compensating. So compensating is putting a different control in place for what's in the baseline. So you're compensating for something that was in the baseline that you can't do for whatever reason. Supplementing is extra that you're just doing because of some specific issue that your system has, or a specific threat, or a specific technology, or something in your environment of operation that causes you to need some additional controls that weren't already in the baseline. So you can do a little gap analysis. You look at your current, what your current security capability is for the organization or the system, what kind of threats can be reasonably addressed by those capabilities, and determine if that is sufficient for you. And if it's not, then you want to go ahead and choose some supplemental controls from the catalog. Now, we identified in 53 Rev 4 a couple of supplementing situations where we went ahead and made some suggestions what controls might help you to supplement against a specific threat. So in this, the one that I copied here is the advanced persistent threat. So if this is a concern for you, or if you know you've got some nasty hackers lurking around in your system, then you might want to think about some of these controls that are defined here to help you address the advanced persistent threat. And some other situations that we included in Revision 4 are cross-domain services, mobility, and classified information. We might do some more as time goes on, but this is what we've included in 53 Rev 4. But you might have additional supplemental needs yourselves, but these are just a couple that we defined for you. So that's tailoring basically. And so when we're finished with the tailoring process, which again is defined in Chapter 3 of 53, we see that we start with our initial security control baseline before tailoring. We go through the tailoring process, which we just discussed, the common controls, the scoping, the compensating, the parameters, and the supplementing, and then you may need extra specifications about how you did implementations, and then that goes, and then now you have your tailored baseline after tailoring, and then you document that. You document what you've done.
Question?
Yes.
For the special tailoring that you have to do, for HIPAA, do you know of any resources out there that can help with those special circumstances?
Well, I don't specifically, other than there's a special pub on HIPAA. Oh boy.
866.
There you go. 866. Thank you.
Yeah, they cross-reference against 853 controls, and then they have a couple of extras for, I can't remember the right term, it's for the business entities that have those records. I think it's a covered entity, or I can't remember the exact term that's under HIPAA, but they have some extra ones just for those covered entities.
Okay, great. And, okay, so that's the tailored baseline. And now let's just talk a little bit about overlays. Overlays are also a new concept that we have included in Revision 4. And they help you to get, if you have a specialized system, or a specialized technology or a special situation or something, an overlay can provide the group as a whole the opportunity to get together and decide for all of these types of specialized systems. And for instance, I think I give some examples later, but I'll just say now, in the federal government, we just had a big mobile government working group where we determined what the controls were that should be applied to the MDMs. Mobile device management system. So we did a big overlay specific to that. So we started with the moderate baseline, and then we did some tailoring. We scoped some out. We added some. We supplemented some. And so the idea is that now all federal organizations can take that and use that and apply that to their mobile device management systems. So that is how an overlay works. And we have a couple other examples I'll get to in a minute. But you fully specify a set of controls, control enhancements and supplemental guidance, and again, overlays do complement the initial security control baseline. So the best thing to do is start with the baseline based on the type of information that is going to be stored, processed, or transmitted by the system in question, and then take it from there. So some usage examples, we have some communities of interest, like HIPAA was just mentioned, and it'd be nice instead of just the sort of light references that we see in 866. It'd be nice if they went through and just did a full-on overlay for HIPAA. But that would be something that community would get together and do and develop themselves. The intelligence, financial community, law enforcement, whatever, information technologies or computing paradigms. We have it with cloud. The whole FedRAMP, the controls that you see defined for FedRAMP is an overlay for cloud systems. That's what it is. They started with the moderate baseline, and they threw only a few out and supplemented, 20 or 40 extra controls in there to counter the threats that we find in cloud systems. So that's an example of a cloud overlay. I mentioned the mobile already. Federal PKI went through, and the federal PKI people got together in a big interagency working group, and they came up with a really nice overlay for PKI systems. And we did the same with Smart Grid, even though there's a lot of external non-governmental organizations associated with Smart Grid. They all got together and came up with a Smart Grid overlay that I believe is defined in a NIST IR. I'm pretty sure it is. And so, the list goes on, different industry sectors, environments of operation, types of information systems, and I have the ICS's industrial control system. I have that bolded because the industrial control system community also went in and did an overlay. And we see that in NIST Special Pub 882. Your types of missions and operations, types of threats. So the point is you can do overlays for any of these types of things. And you get together as a community and you apply it to the whole community. So if you're just doing it as one system, it's not an overlay, it's just a specialized system security plan. But when you do it with the intent of applying it to a group of systems, then that's when it becomes an overlay. So how do we develop overlays? We start with the baseline, and then we go through the tailoring process. And again, we use teams of subject matter experts to develop the overlays, in addition to our system owners. And you can make the overlays as specific or and you can make them. You can allow for flexibility, or depending on the community, maybe you don't allow for flexibility. It really depends. I know with FedRAMP, as the example, there's not much room for flexibility there. You're either gonna, if you're a cloud service provider, you're either gonna implement those controls or you're not gonna be on the list. So there's not much flexibility there. But I know in the industrial control system overlay, there's definitely some room for flexibility. So it really depends. So there you go. Okay, let's talk about assurance. I mentioned it earlier. Assurance is the measure of confidence that you have. Yes?
Quick question about your overlays and stuff.
Yes?
Now, I wasn't exactly sure. That's not incorporated into Rev 4 or anything. It's just you're introducing the concept of using an overlay, which is a tailoring process, or do you have tools associated with the overlay process?
Well, we don't exactly have tools, so there's a whole section in Chapter 3, and then now Appendix I is an overlay appendix, and there is a template that you can use to develop your overlay. So, again, our intent with overlays is it's not on a one system, one-off basis. It doesn't become an overlay till it's, in theory, if you've gone through the tailoring process, every system security plan could be an overlay, except it's only an overlay, again, if it's applying to some, larger community where everybody gets together and decides, for all of these types of systems, this is what we're going to do, everybody's going to do this. So again, we do provide the guidance in there about it, we talk about it, we provide more obviously than what I've just talked about, and then in Appendix I, there's a template, and we'll probably, I see this concept being expanded in the future.
They don't exist as, these templates, as you call them, they don't exist as separate like PDF documents or Word documents, anything like that.
No, well, they're not, it's just a template, it's not, I mean, we're not telling anyone what should be in their overlay,
Okay.
so. And all of those groups that I mentioned, the ones that, the bolded ones there, you know, that was a community that got together on their own and did it themselves because they had a need to do it.
But they didn't make their templates available for us to use as a baseline to go from? Or
Well, the FedRAMP ones are,
okay.
and they have very good templates, I think. I think they did a pretty good job. I applaud their efforts. And they're out there, if you just go to fedramp.gov, you'll see it. And I don't know if the PKI guys did a pretty good job too. And the mobile ones are out there. If you search around, the mobile overlay, I think, is available through, it's like Digital Government Strategy, DGS, Digital Government Strategy 9.1. So if you Google that, you may or may find that one's publicly available, but the FedRAMP ones are definitely publicly available. Good? Okay. So, back to assurance, the measure of confidence that we need to have in our level of protection. And assurance-related controls are ones that, you can see the list here, they define processes and procedures, techniques or methodologies, they provide support for operational processes, they produce security evidence, that's a big one. So like all the assessment controls are assurance controls, the continuous monitoring controls are assurance controls because they produce security evidence. Determining control effectiveness or risk, if they help do that, or if they improve personnel skills, so a lot of the training ones are assurance related. So we're gonna see, though we don't have to guess what they are because we have tables for that. So in Appendix E, we have 4 tables, and the tables give us the minimum required assurance controls that are already provided by your baseline. So the point we're making is that if you have a low impact system and you do the low impact baseline, then these controls that you see listed here in table E1, they're the assurance controls. They're already selected in your baseline. So if you just need a low impact level of assurance, you're all done if you do the low impact baseline. Now watch out, if you scope out of these, then maybe you have an assurance related issue if you scope out of one or more of these, so keep that in mind. But basically, there's a similar table E2 for moderate, table E3 for high impact, and then there's table E4 that ropes in all the other assurance related controls that are not selected in any baseline. So if you need additional assurance, if you're a low impact system, but for some reason there's something going on, there's some threats, or you've had some problems or whatever, then and you need to implement some additional assurance related controls, you can look at the tables E2, E3, and E4 and pull some assurance related controls out of those to supplement the level of assurance that you and help you get that level of assurance. So that's how that works. And that's a big change. I don't know if anybody read Appendix E in any of the previous versions, but it was very theoretical. So this way it gives people something concrete to grab onto. And again, if you need additional assurance, then you just pull those assurance controls out of the next couple of levels up. And if you're a high impact system, then you pull them from table E4. And then we have the privacy. How is state of California, do you have privacy officers? Someone is here for privacy? Yay, all right, good. So you'll be very happy, I guess, to see that we included Appendix J in 853, which is a set of privacy controls. Privacy and security are complementary and mutually reinforcing, and that's why we went ahead and included them in 853. So they're not security controls, but we want to see privacy and security working closely together, and so we went ahead and put the Appendix J with the privacy controls into 853. So the privacy control families are the same as those in the Federal Enterprise Architecture Security and Privacy Profile. The appendix was written by an interagency privacy working group. So myself and Ron and the other folks in the JTF that did the security controls in Appendix F, we did not do Appendix J at all. The privacy working group did it, made up of chief privacy officers and other privacy professionals. So they came up with the controls in there, and they, when we had comments coming in from the public comment process, they were given those comments, they adjudicated them and made, whatever changes that they thought necessary. So that's how the privacy appendix came into being. And you can see there that they based it on these are actually called FIPS with 2 P's, so watch out for that, not to be confused with Federal Information Processing Standards. There's some privacy stuff here in Section 208 of the E-Government Act, which is the same act that, if you'll recall, that FSMA came from, and any guidance that came out of Office of Management and Budget that had to do with privacy, all roped into the controls in Appendix J. And so, again, we wanted to promote that closer cooperation between privacy and security. So we felt that there was a lot of siloing. The privacy people were over here doing their thing, the security people were over there doing their thing, and there wasn't enough good coordination and cooperation between the two. And so, that's why we put it in 853. Appendix J is intended for privacy officials, though, but the expectation is that they should work with program managers, system developers, technology staff, and security personnel to get those implemented as needed. And each control is applied with respect to the organization's distinct mission and operational needs. Now, here's a slide on implementing the privacy controls. They're not associated with low, moderate, and high impact levels, so watch out for that. They're based on the privacy requirements of the organization and what types of information do they have within the organization that is privacy related. It's coordinated with the organizational stakeholders, and you may also develop privacy overlays in support of specific privacy requirements such as HIPAA and CIPSIA, which is Confidential Information Protection and Statistical Efficiency Act. So if you have some information that's covered by that act, then perhaps you might want to look at a statewide overlay for that, I don't know, of privacy controls. The privacy controls are assessed and monitored for effectiveness by privacy professionals rather than by security professionals. And privacy assessments may be conducted by the Chief Privacy Officer or other organizational risk management offices. So the controls in Appendix J, they're set up in the same way. The organization and the format is set up just like the controls in Appendix F. And some of those controls do have control enhancements. So the way it's supposed to be implemented is, since we don't have the low, moderate, and high baselines like we do in Appendix F, the assumption is, and this is in the guidance in Appendix J, the assumption is that the organizations have to implement all of the base controls, and then the enhancements are sort of optional depending on their whatever's going on with their privacy issues. So that's for the privacy officers to determine. So that's Appendix J. All right. And here we see the privacy control families. They're largely not technical. They're more process driven. But these are the families that are addressed in Appendix J. And again, I believe that stemmed from that Federal Enterprise Architecture document. And that's it. That's all for 853 Rev 4. Thank you.